The Mueller Testimony. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning and welcome to our special coverage of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's congressional testimony. This day has been a long time coming. For months it seemed it may not happen at all, and now the stakes are high. For Mueller, the members of Congress questioning him, you see Mueller coming into the hearing room just moments ago, and for the president he's investigated for almost 2 years. Bottom line, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. On obstruction, no bottom line. He then adds this blunt coda. If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, we are unable to reach that judgment. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. That balanced paragraph has become a Rorschach test of our tribal politics. I'm joined this morning by our whole political team, including World News anchor David Muir at the Capitol. And David, perhaps the most consequential question on the table today: will Mueller's appearance accelerate momentum towards impeachment or wind it down once and for all?
No question, George, that is the central question. A hugely consequential day up here on the Hill. As you showed there just moments ago, Robert Mueller has arrived up here on the Hill. 5 hours of questioning. The American people hearing from Robert Mueller in his own words. And George, as you mentioned, the issue of impeachment up here on the Hill, we've heard from about 90 House Democrats who have supported the idea of impeachment. The big question today, will other Democrats, other lawmakers hear anything different from Robert Mueller that will change their mind? Of course, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, has famously said, she said it again in recent days, let us see where the facts take us. She continues to make that point. And we all, of course, remember what Robert Mueller said in just May. He said, I expect this is the only time I will speak to you in this manner. And yet here Robert Mueller is again today. This is what the Democrats wanted. They wanted Mueller up here on the Hill answering questions so that the American people could hear a voice, not just the report itself. Democrats are convinced many Americans simply haven't had time to read the report, to absorb it. They hope today that Mueller will shed new light on what he found. And central to the questioning today, George, and you brought this up, those instances of possible obstruction of justice. When Robert Mueller handed this report to the Justice Department, he made no decision on obstruction. Bill Barr then did, essentially clearing the president. And Robert Mueller will be asked today, is that what he wanted? Did he want Barr to make that decision, or did he want Congress? He'll likely be asked that question a multitude of different ways today. We'll see if Congress gets an answer, George.
We will see. To David Muir, also at the Capitol. At times, it did appear that Robert Mueller was having trouble following the questioning.
It did appear that way, which is probably why he wanted his deputy chief of staff there right by his side. That request in the last week or so that made a lot of news in the last 24 hours, to have him sitting beside him to help him point directly to the page numbers in that report that were continually being cited by both Democrats and Republicans. You heard Robert Mueller repeatedly say very one-word answers pointing right back to the report, particularly on the Democratic side of the questioning when they were trying to press on those points that Mary just mentioned on the potential examples of obstruction of justice. Mueller repeatedly said, I turn back to the report, and then the Democrats would simply read from Mueller's report for him. There had been a lot of questions about whether or not we would hear Robert Mueller reading portions of that report, and it would appear, at least so far today, that lawmakers in choosing to read it are reading it for him. But again, to go back to those two key points that Mary mentioned, the questioning that said, did you totally exonerate the president? Mueller saying no on that. And then that tense back and forth a moment ago on the Democratic side about Don McGahn, the president's lawyer, who obviously was mentioned a multitude of times in the Mueller report, a series of back and forth questions on whether or not Don McGahn had been told to lie about that public narrative, and Mueller repeatedly pointing back to the Mueller report.
Yeah,
and seriously and with integrity.
David Muir, in some ways, the most emotion he showed that entire hearing.
Yeah, no question. In that conversation you just had about energy from Robert Mueller, that was the most impassioned moment of this entire hearing this morning. You could see the Republicans methodically in the second part of the hearing after the break trying to poke holes in the credibility of Robert Mueller's team, some of the prosecutors on his team, and he was very forceful in saying over the course of his career he has never asked about political affiliation. There was a Democrat on the committee, Greg Stanton of Arizona, who returned to it just before they wrapped up, asking, when you look back, had you ever asked someone which party they voted for, what their affiliation was? And he said never in his career. That was a common theme from Republicans in the second part of the hearing. And as you point out, George, on the Democratic side, they continued to methodically go down those examples of possible obstruction of justice when it came to Don McGahn, the pressure against him, bringing in Corey Lewandowski and going after Jeff Sessions to put pressure on him when it came to Bob Mueller and whether or not he would keep his job. And there was an interesting moment from Debbie Lesko of Arizona, the congresswoman, who then simply asked Mr. Mueller, were you ever fired? He actually said, I'm sorry, what? And she said, were you ever fired as special counsel? He said, no, not that I'm aware of, he was beginning to say. She asked, were you ever allowed to complete your investigation? Yes. And she then finished by saying, and you, in the end, resigned yourself as special counsel. He said, yes. That was a moment that stood out to us here on the Hill.
And thank you, David. And David Muir, I mean, this was the big question coming in to the hearing today, whether or not it would advance the ball for some Democrats on impeachment. Again, a reminder of history. And in the Watergate case, it didn't break until a member of his own party called for impeachment. Even Bill Clinton had to face serious opposition in his own party over his own actions before impeachment gained momentum. That has not happened here.
No, it certainly hasn't happened among Republicans. And even as Mary points out, the temperature among Democrats really isn't even there yet. And it'd be hard to imagine House Speaker Nancy Pelosi watching this hearing today and thinking to herself that we have the goods now to move forward with impeachment. I don't think that that's what she's thinking today. And many of the Democrats who Mary just talked to actually put words to that. And one of the things absent from this hearing today is that central message from Mueller that they would have needed probably to move forward or at least try to build some momentum for impeachment. And that is, what was your intention in turning that report over to William Barr? Did you want him to make the decision ultimately and essentially clear the president on obstruction, or did you think the responsibility lies in the hands of Congress? We did not get that pointed question today for Robert Mueller. And as Governor Christie said earlier in our coverage, if you don't ask that question, you're not going to get that answer.
Well, no, and he did. Then at the end, when he finally did say, no, I'm not going to answer the question on impeachment at all. I'm not going to answer that question about the constitutional process. David Muir, he clearly said what he thinks campaigns ought to do if a country comes forward with this information in the future, go to the FBI.
He absolutely made that clear, George. You know, you talk about this stark political divide, but there was another major difference with this afternoon's hearing, and that was Robert Mueller's willingness, and perhaps he thought this was safer territory for him later in the day to really go after the Russian meddling that he said there is no question that it occurred on a grand level. And in fact, Congresswoman Speer said this was a Russian invasion. She said that Mueller's language in his report didn't go far enough, and that's when Mueller said, yes, I do believe we underplayed it. There was a moment there at the beginning where he talked most about the Trump family before the election that he had really all day here up on the Hill when asked by Congressman Schiff, the chair of the committee, about Michael Flynn and money to be made and the Trump family and money to be made off the Moscow Tower. And he gave a series of yes answers and then stopped talking about President Trump. Again, later when it went back to Schiff for the remainder of time there, he was asking about Don Jr. and the meeting at Trump Tower and whether or not conspiracy involves an offer and then accepting that offer, setting up the meeting, having Don Jr. say, I love it. You could almost sense Robert Mueller realizing this was going a little further than he was comfortable with. And then Congressman Schiff, the chairman, ran out of time. He said he'd get back to it.
Yeah, and mostly asked those yes-no questions. Perhaps the most fitting close to this hearing were the final words from Robert Mueller saying he won't speculate, that he would not go beyond the four corners of his report if he appeared in Congress, and that is exactly what happened today. Everyone stuck to the script. Democrats stuck to their script. They emphasized the most damning parts of Robert Mueller's report, tried to get him to go beyond that. He wouldn't go. Republicans focused on what they have been most concerned about, the origins of the Mueller investigation. Couldn't get him to speculate on that either. So we're left with the big question after all this. After a hearing with no blazing headline, did anything really change? Let me take that to you, David Muir.
And we essentially stick to the script as well, George, because this is exactly the way we started our special coverage today. The temperature here on the Hill, unquestionably, is likely just as it was when these hearings began today. About 90 Democrats up here in the House have expressed interest, support for impeachment. Obviously, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has continually said we must follow the facts. She said this again in the last couple of days. She, no doubt, watching the hearings as well today. And some powerful words as we ended this hearing, which was a similar ending to the Robert Mueller statement at the end of May when he brought it back to Russian interference. He said they are doing it as we sit here. In that final exchange from Chairman Schiff and Robert Mueller, he did ask, can we understand here that getting help from foreign adversaries is unethical? And Robert Mueller actually, in addition to that, said a crime as well, given the circumstances. Schiff then said unpatriotic. He said true. Wrong. He said true. But he did not directly point to President Trump in offering that to Chairman Schiff.
And take that would not go one step farther. That's right, David Muir. Thanks very much. And of course, there'll be full coverage tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir in Washington. Have a good day.